So this is the presentation that we are calling First Steps Towards a Grant. So this is sort of very basic, the very first things that you have to do to make sure that you can apply for our program. So the first thing we're going to talk about, this is kind of a plan for how this presentation is going to go. We're going to do an overview of the grant programs, and that will include the most important parts, which are how to know that you're an eligible applicant, an eligible organization, and how to know that your project is eligible, because those are the two boxes that you have to check in order to be able to apply, or in order to be able to get a grant. And then how to register, which is a pretty simple process, and I'll give you a bit of background on what happens when you register and when you can expect to get a reply from us with your registration information, and then how to start your application. So our programs, we have three main programs at the moment. The Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Program, which is what we generally call the legacy grants. That's kind of the best known, and that's what most people think of when they think of our grants. We also have the Heritage Partnership Program and the State Capital Projects Grants and Aid. The State Capital we haven't done in a couple of years. We haven't had money for that, so this year we do. So if you have questions about that project specifically, there are people that specific people to have you talk with. And that deadline, the pre-app for that, is actually coming up pretty soon. So these are some of the things that we talk about as the objectives for the grant program. So this is for all of them. This is kind of our guiding principles, basically. Minnesota history and historic preservation. That seems very general, but that's really what it's about. And then within that, the things that you have to argue in your application are that this project has some form of public benefit and people will have access to it, that it's a sustainable project for the long term, and that you meet applicable professional standards. That's kind of the larger theoretical things that you have to prove in your application. So public benefit and access, we wanted to talk specifically about that because that really is one of the major things that we're looking for, and that we have to make sure that we see in these applications. The smaller sort of day-to-day version of that is that you need to say how the results of your project will be made available to the public in some way. So that can be if you're writing a book, the book will be purchasable. Obviously something like an exhibit. If you're having an exhibit, it needs to be an exhibit in a space that's publicly accessible that everyone is welcome into. Another thing would be if you're doing preservation on a building, you would say that building has, maybe there's a community space in that building, or it's owned by the city, or it has some sort of public benefit to the space to the building being fixed up, or to certain things being repaired. And then the larger scale of that, if you're stepping back, the idea is that all Minnesotans have better access to their history through these grant programs, through these projects. And I say both in primary and secondary forms, because by that I mean, the funding can work on projects that, make immediate sources accessible to people. So helping archives process their collections, making historic buildings safer for people to be in, doing oral histories where you're getting these stories straight from people, preserving object collections, those sort of immediate primary sources of how we study history. And then the secondary form is how those things are interpreted. So that would be, funding an exhibit, funding a book, that sort of broader interpretation of Minnesotan history. And all of that needs to have an element of public benefit and access. So that's sort of a major thing that we wanted to call out. Next one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about all the different grant programs. So what we always call the Legacy Grant Program, which is the Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Program. That money comes from, so if you think of the Legacy Amendment, the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment was passed in 2008 by Minnesotans. Within that, there's the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And then within that, there's money for the Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Program. So these grants. So it's part of that giant pot of money. And this is a good time also to plug that the Legacy Amendment is a 25-year amendment. It is up in 2034. So if you like legacy money, if you like the projects, you want to be able to see that. Someone's calling. That's bad. don't know why it rings on my computer. Sorry about that. So if you like the legacy amendment, if you want, it's up to all of us to lobby to keep that and to tell the state, tell the legislature why we think this program matters and why we want to see the legacy amendment be continued. So we're already halfway through it because it's 2034. So within this program, these are some of the things, within this grant program, these are some of the things that we fund. Oral histories, research and writing, interpretive programs, publications, collections care. These are all sort of things that I mentioned before. Let me see, what's next? I have some notes on this. Oh, and then these are some of the other categories. So this is more the historic property side. So we basically have two halves. We have the history and the historic properties side. And if you look at our grants manual, you'll see that it's broken up that way also. So then the other part of this, and I have been in this office for 2 years and I still find it, I still only recently learned to explain how the structured grants fit in within that. So the way to think about a structured grant is think about it as the simple grants. Think about it as structured, simple grants. These are applications that are very standard projects, circumscribed things that people throughout the state have done. They have we know what they are, what the project is involved. There's people around the state that know how to do it. And it's just simple. It's a straightforward project. A lot of these things are projects that you want to do early on if you're working on, if you have a particular site or project in mind, or if you're taking care, if your museum needs to really go back to basics to help get everything under control with the collections, things like that. So these are simple applications where we pared down all the complicated stuff. And I think there's 10 of them that are very specific categories. These applications are much shorter and simpler than the larger application, the main application that we use, and they're very direct. So we call them structured because, well, they're very simple and put together. So they're legacy grants, and they're within this. They're generally fit really well within the small grant amount of $10,000. So I'll go back. These are some of the things you can do, getting a microfilm reader, developing a disaster plan, doing an HVAC evaluation. One of our favorites was just the general conservation assessment and long range preservation plan, a property evaluation, that sort of thing. They're very straightforward projects. So the most important thing before you can apply is that your organization has to be eligible. So in Minnesota, the people that can apply are formal 501c3 nonprofits. And that is, I say formal because there are also religious institutions that are given immediate 501c3 nonprofit status, but in order to be eligible for a grant in our program, they have to have that formal status. They have to have gone through the paperwork also. Or be a subordinate organization to a larger group that holds a formal 501c3. Units of state and local government, so cities, counties, that sort of thing, federally recognized tribes, and educational institutions. And then there's also cooperative projects which allow groups to work together to apply. But that's something that's in the grants manual. And if you have questions about doing a cooperative project, that is a really good thing to talk to us about one-on-one so that we can walk you through all the details of that. So there are 5 grant rounds a year within the legacy program. We also have the other programs. There's one large round, which is requests over $10,000. So that application is always due in the fall, and the required pre-application is either in May or July. And every time I talk about a pre-application, it's required. We don't have optional pre-applications. Any application that requires that, you have to submit a pre-app ahead of time, or else you don't make it into the final round. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And it's all, to make the projects, to help you guys. It's not to make it harder. It's not a hurdle. It's something we do it to make everything more competitive and stronger. So we have that large round. And then we also have the 4 small rounds, which are quarterly. The next one coming up is in July, and those are for $10,000 or less. For all of these, there is no match required, but we do say it's an application review criterion, especially for the large grants. The Historic Resources Advisory Committee really, especially for really large applications, really wants to see match, cash match, in-kind match. Those are all things that you should put on your application if you have them, because it shows a certain amount of community buy-in. For all 5 rounds, we generally have between $4 and $6 million. And we usually get about, through the whole year for all those rounds, we usually get about 350 applications. And then we generally are able to award 200 to 250 of those every year. So we did have a much more complicated slide that had a whole bunch of arrows. And if you've ever been in one of our other ones, you've probably seen that slide. So here I just tried to pare it down really well to make it a lot more simple. And you'll see this slide a couple times, because this is the general process for the large grants, the large legacy grants, the partnership grants, and the capital grants. And I'll get to partnership and capital after this. So it's very, the things in green, in bold are your responsibility as the applicant. You develop your application, you make sure that you submit that pre-application, which is required, and that's generally just consider that a draft. And something that's useful to point out about the pre-app is we don't have any sort of minimum amount that you need to fill out in order for it to count as submitted. What we tell people is fill it out as much as you possibly can, because the whole point of the pre-app is for us to give you lots of feedback so that we can help you improve your project, tell you what's looking, what needs help, what needs to be changed or punched up or something like that. So the more that you write, the more that we can help you. If you only enter a little bit of information, we can't give you all that much feedback. So then it comes into our office. We do review and comment, as I was just saying, on those, get it back to you. And then you edit and submit your final application. So you take those comments and you do recommended edits, you talk to us, you ask us questions, how to make this as strong as possible. Then it comes back to us, we review it. Review and decisions is a pretty simple way of putting all the stuff that goes on our side. When we review it and do content review, applications that are more than $100,000 need to have an outside peer reviewer also. And then the HRAC, Historic Resources Advisory Committee, looks at them, makes the recommendations to the MNHS Executive Council. And then you get funded and you start your project. Or if you don't get funded, we return it to you with comments so that you can submit it the next time. So for the small application process, so this is for the $10,000 and below, which are the quarterly rounds, it's much more simple. You develop your application, you submit it, we review it, we decide what is fundable and what's being returned, and then you start your project. And if you aren't funded, you get a letter that has lots of recommendations of what you need to do to change it so that we can fund it. So that's a much more, and usually our process takes 6 to 8 weeks. So by the time you hear back from us, you have about 4 weeks. And then there's another deadline right there in front of you, which you can, if it's a simple process, you can just make your corrections and resubmit it right then. So here's our upcoming deadline dates. The next one is in July for the small round. For the large round, that required pre-application is also due in July. And then the final application is due September 10th. So sometime between then, we'll review the pre-applications in July and get you comments back as soon as possible. And we have a timeline for that if you want to know the details. And then you'll have time to do your final application before you submit it on the 10th. And those deadlines, I didn't put it in this slide. That's always 11:59 p.m. So it's always right before midnight on that date. So the State Capital Projects Grants and Aid, this is one that I have not been through this. This will be my first time going through this round. This is very different from the legacy money. It's very different from the legacy grants. These are state bonding funds, and the organizations that are eligible are state and local government units. Match in this case is required. A 1-for-1 match is required for these grants. We only do it once a year, and the award amount available this year, I don't know if it would change. I assume that amount changes, but this year it's $750,000. So these projects, what is funded in this project are historic preservation projects of a capital nature, and they have to be publicly owned buildings that are eligible for or listed already on the National Register of Historic Places. So this is that same slide again. It's the same process. You have your application, you submit the pre-application, which is a draft. We give you comments on it, you submit your final. The reviews and decisions on this, in this pot of money, the Grants Review Committee, which is a different group from the Historic Resources Advisory Committee, looks at these applications and then makes their recommendations to the Executive Council, and then you start your project. So that pre-application deadline is coming up soon in a couple weeks, the end of May, and then the final application is due July 9th. So the third one is the Heritage Partnership Program. So this money is also from the Legacy Amendment, just like the what we call the Legacy Grants. Who is funded in these are 2 or more organizations, but one organization takes on the lead. They're the lead applicant. We don't require a match in this either. We do 1 round a year, and this year the award amount available was $390,000. And these, I don't think I put it in here. These are all $10,000 and above. So these are essentially large grants. So what is funded? This program is interesting. It is very different from our legacy grants. What we fund is the capacity of eligible applicants to preserve and enhance access to Minnesota's history and cultural resources by supporting the creation and development of sustainable history-based partnerships throughout the state. So this program funds the development of a partnership. It can fund a way to design to share services or resources among partners, or it can solve an identified gap in the history and historic preservation fields through this partnership. So again, it's the same slide. It's all the same process with the pre-app and the edits and the final application. And the partnership program is also the Grants Review Committee. So we just finished up one of these rounds. The Grants Review Committee just met a couple weeks ago. So we're sending those contracts out now for who did get funded. So if you want to do a partnership, you have a long time. The pre-application isn't due until January 21st, and then the final application is due March 4th. So how to register? This is the fun part. So we're done talking about, what kinds of programs that you have available to you. Registering is the same for everyone. You need to request an account in the grants portal, and that you go, you see the form to request it. It's not like a lot of, places on the internet where you request an account. You don't get something automatic back. What it is the form comes into our queue on our side of the grants portal, and we look through it to make sure that you're eligible. We have to check a few different things to make sure you're not already in the portal, and if you are, to update it. And if you aren't, we have to confirm that you're eligible. So one thing that you really have to make sure to do, I tell people this all the time, is you have to include your organization's employer identification number, which is what's called an EIN. It's a federal number. You have it on your W-9, any kind of tax forms you have, you'd be very familiar with it. But so many times people just type in 9 zeros, or they type in the name of their organization, and that slows everything down. So just make sure when you go to apply that you have that number handy, because you have to put it in the form in order to hear back. And we generally take about 2 business days to do that. We really prefer that people don't register the last week before the application's due, but we will do our best to get back to you with your eligibility, as long as everything on your side is in order with the EIN. And then sometimes, especially if you're a religious organization, we'll have to follow up with some additional paperwork that we need. And that paperwork is listed in the grants manual. I think it's page 4. So to do all of that, you go to this address, which is our portal. And this is on our grants. This is on our website also. This is what it looks like. You go to the button, create an account. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but it says create an account. And then you fill out this form. And this is where you make sure that you put your EIN, your federal employer identification number in, which is in this field here at the top of the second column. You have to put that 9-digit number in. And it's usually written as 2 digits - 7 digits. So that's how you'll recognize it if you're looking for it. And then what will happen is I will get back to you with a login, which will be your email address, and a password. And then you will go back to the website where you registered, and you'll type that in, and you will get into the portal. So this is the gray bar on the left side. You'll often, if you ask us a question about the portal, we'll often refer you to the gray bar on the left side, the dark gray bar. So where the arrow is pointing is where you start an application. So this is where the structured grants becomes a little confusing again, because the structured grants are legacy grants. But you see here that there's 2 it says apply for legacy grant, apply for structured grant. And that's just kind of a quirk of how our system works. If you're applying for a large grant or a small grant in the legacy program, a large grant, you would always click on the apply for legacy grant. The only time you would do structured grant is if you're going to do one of those, I think, 10 really simple, specific applications. And again, that's a very easy, if you have any doubt about it, just email us and we'll tell you which one to do. And then obviously Heritage Partnership and state capital grants are down here. So then you will click on that. You'll see this white page on the right side of your screen. And you'll click on the green apply for Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Grant. So that's basically it. These are some of our tips and resources. These are things that we always tell people. The main thing is to start early. The closer that we get to our deadlines, our office gets pretty slammed. And that, we want you to start early because one of the best parts of our jobs is helping people get their projects ready to go and ready for their applications. We want to be able to help. And then we also often, pretty much every question has follow-up questions that are related to it. Or we want to refer you to someone else in our office that can talk to you about the content of your project, or the administrative side or your budget or whatever. There's so many elements of it. And we want to have plenty of time to follow up on all of that with you and make sure that you get the answers that you need to have a successful application. But when that happens at the end of the round, right before something's due, obviously we're spread a lot more thin. So we really want to have lots of time to work with you. The other thing is don't get discouraged. If you get, we don't say reject, we return, unless there's something really ineligible about the project. Well, even then we would give you, the information that you need to make the project eligible. Sometimes you'll get a return letter and it would be a couple of really simple things. Other times it's more complicated things that you need to change. But it's not a rejection, it's a return. We're sending it back to you because a couple things need to be fixed in order to make it fundable. So don't just try not to get discouraged, even though it is a lot of work and the application can be a lot of work and it does feel kind of discouraging if you don't get funded the first time, but don't give up. Ask us for advice and help. Email us at grants@mnhs.org. Obviously we all have our own email addresses, but that's generally the best and it's easy to remember and the best and easiest way to get in touch with us. Several of us check that email account multiple times a day. So that's a good way to hear back from the person that you need to hear back from, the simplest. You can read the whole grants manual if you want. I think it's 160 pages now. You can also just read the parts of the grants manual that you think, that look relevant to you. There's lots of other information on our website. The fact that you're listening to this webinar is hopefully setting you up to know what you're getting into and know what you're looking at once you open up the grants manual and request an account. And then local history news is a great thing to sign up for. That's what our local history staff puts together, that newsletter. And those are all people that do content review for these grants also and know the programs really well, and offer a lot of feedback on applications and projects. And the really neat thing about, if you subscribe for local history news, you'll see at least in every newsletter, at least once and sometimes twice in every newsletter, we talk about previous grant programs or previous grant projects and things that have been successful. So it's a really good way to get an idea of the kinds of things that people are working on, and how they're being successful with this money in Minnesota. So I feel like I blew through that last part pretty fast. But yeah, half an hour, not too bad. So if anyone wants to ask specific questions, or what we can do is, if you want to let us know a little bit about your project, I can put you in touch directly with the person that would be best for you to talk to about what you're thinking about. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions. You're welcome, Marilyn. Thank you for coming. Let us know if you have questions or email the grants box. All good? Okay, great. And I'll say this so that, if anyone downloads this online also, we're going to do these introductory webinars quarterly. I think the next one is in August, I believe. So it'll be basically this. I think we'll refine it a little bit every time. But we wanted to just have these really, introductory processes up for people to listen to kind of get an idea of what they're going to dive into. So I think I will sign off. And just remember, anyone has questions, you can email us at grants@mnhs.org, and one of us will get back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.